Obviously, as you can see, the basic title of this particular clip is Victimizing the Victims. And what really ticks me off about this is the age of the victims and how they are being victimized. And I want to focus in particular on the fact that all of these victims that are in this particular story are black. There seems like there's been a rash of rapes by police, rapes by regular citizens. But it seems like when black women are raped, it becomes an afterthought to the point that they actually come under attack. In case you're not aware of it, there was a case up near Buffalo where a police officer answered a call of a woman who was concerned about her daughter being missing. He comes into the house and rapes the woman in front of her 2-month-old son. She reported it immediately. Law enforcement stepped in, the man was arrested, and he got a whopping 6 months of jail time. Why? Because she, quote unquote, didn't vocalize the word no, though she did say everything else. And because of a unique law in the state of New York, because she, quote unquote, didn't vocalize the word no, and she used other words to indicate that she did not want to do this and it was against her will, but because she didn't vocalize the word no, they couldn't specifically charge him with rape, which is a bunch of crap. Another case in point, it took 13 victims to step forward in order for Daniel Holtzclaw to be arrested, indicted, and convicted of rape. India has a huge problem with rape that has been publicized, but the United States may have just as big a problem, but it's being basically swept under the rug. I want you to pay close attention to this particular story and then tell me why, instead of these girls being supported by the city of New York, because one of these situations happened inside of a school. The second, though, it didn't happen inside of a school. The school basically treated her like dirt. And the third situation, you'll hear for yourself, it's very, very similar.
When black public school girls in New York City report sexual abuse, they often get punished instead of getting help. 3 federal complaints in the last 7 months have been filed on behalf of victims who range in age from 13 to 15. The complaints state that after the students were sexually assaulted, they were suspended, forced to return to the class with the assailants, or given the runaround when they asked for a school transfer. Carrie Goldberg, the attorney who filed the complaints, joined us from New York City via Skype. And still on the panel, Dr. Greg Carr, Carmen Berkeley, and Ralph Chittims. So thank you for joining us here today, and thank you for bringing attention to what's happening in New York City. What's going on in these cases? What are the facts?
Well, first of all, Title IX is a federal civil rights law that's been on the books since 1972, and it guarantees that all students will be treated by educational institutions that receive federal funds. They'll be treated the same regardless of gender. And the United States Department of Education Office of Civil Rights is responsible for enforcing Title IX, as well as prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, color, disability or national origin.
But why are you going that route? You've had sexual assault claims, right? Why hasn't this been dealt with in the criminal courts?
Well, they're two parallel paths. Only law enforcers can decide whether or not something's going to be criminalized. In all three of my cases, the schools have played a role in deterring the crimes from moving forward. And one of the only tools that victims really have is to take matters into their own hands. And they can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights themselves, or they can hire a lawyer like me to do it for them. And we can also sue.
Now, I've read about some of the facts in this case that include minor young girls who are being forced to perform oral sex, who are being sodomized, etc. And you're telling me that the schools were not involved in trying to help prosecute these young men for these crimes?
Not only were the schools not trying to help prosecute the men, but they were actively punishing the girls.
How were they doing that?
Well, let me tell you one case, for instance. My client was then a 13-year-old girl, black. She's the oldest daughter of a single mom who speaks no English and was a part-time home attendant. They just recently moved out of the domestic violence shelter into this apartment. And on one cold day in April, my client was dragged from the school bus stop by a peer and orally and anally sodomized. And he filmed it. So a couple weeks later, when the video footage of her being raped had gone viral throughout the school not only refused to believe that it was a non-consensual act, but they told my client that her continued presence in school was distracting everybody and causing everyone to look at her pornography, and she was best off just staying home. She was then just left and forgotten. To me, that's a forcible suspension. And in another case, the child...
All right. This guy had the balls to videotape the fact that he was raping this girl, and the school basically did nothing about it. And where the hell was law enforcement? Because if this guy put that video up on the internet and that girl was, 15 or younger, that's child pornography. So he should have been prosecuted for that alone. But anyway, let's keep going.
Was actually suspended. A 15-year-old dragged into a stairwell by 7 boys, who then reports it to the guidance counselor, gets suspended.
And she's suspended, they claim, for performing sexual acts on school grounds, right? That was what her victim-blaming scenario was in their minds. Is that right?
That's right. I got another case yesterday. It's not in New York City, it's in New Jersey, but same story, where she told a trusted educator that she'd been attacked. They believed that there had been a sex act, and then they punished her. And all my cases are underprivileged black girls.
I'm glad you brought up the New Jersey case, not because it happened, but because you're calling this an epidemic. Is this very prevalent throughout the country, do you think, what's happening to these young black women? Or is it just something that's happening in the New York or tri-state area? That's an obvious rhetorical question for you.
Well, I am a lawyer in New York, so I see more New York cases. But I do have cases in Indiana, I've got a case in Texas, one in New Jersey. There is an epidemic of punishing victims and believing that the girls were asking for it. It's that kind of age-old slut-shaming and victim-blaming that we've been talking about at the college level, and not giving it its equal conversation on the junior high and high school level.
I know my panel is chomping at the bit. Dr. Carr, what is your take on this? I mean, we're talking about young black women who are 13 to 15 years old, probably younger and some older. Is this a case of victim blaming, or is it more pointed for black women and young black women?
There's no doubt about it, the fact that the law has to be used as a weapon in this instance, particularly Title IX, to force this conversation and to get some semblance of justice for these young women. I think that beyond that, this is a systemic question. This is a question of culture. Nothing happens in a school that isn't imported from outside. This has everything to do with social media. It has everything to do with popular culture. How is gender looked at? I mean, the young people are learning these lessons, even in terms of implicit bias. These boys, they're not men. Even to talk about them as men, for example, is to frame this in a context where, you know, there's really no solutions beyond addressing this first in the courts. They have to be protected. And then secondly, and deeper into the structure of this country, we have to reframe this conversation.
I agree with you about having young boys be painted as predators and grown men in the criminal courts being a problem. I don't agree when you have a young female victim who is being preyed upon by somebody who's her peer, that we excuse them as being boys, right? I know you're saying that. Carmen, what do you think? This is crazy.
I'm disgusted. I mean, I feel like this is not a misunderstanding. It's not about promiscuity. I also think that we confuse penetrative sex, violence, with what sexual assault is. It's more than that. It's an act that is against your own free will. There are a lot of organizations, one of which is Trust Black Women, that talk about this issue from a reproductive justice issue. But I think that as a Black community, we've got to figure out how we're going to talk about these issues and not sweep them under the rug, but also not let the boys off the hook. For some reason, it's always about, well, what was the girl doing? What was the girl wearing? That's the conversation that we had around Bill Cosby and my hair salon. It cannot just be about the women. It has to be, as a Black community, we say this behavior is unacceptable and we're going to shut it down every time it happens.
They're prosecuting Bill Cosby with no goddamn evidence, and these girls all have evidence, and they are trying to sweep this crap under the rug. I gotta tell you, if I was the father of any of those girls, those boys right now would be taking dirt naps, because if the system wasn't gonna get justice for my daughter, I damn sure would.
Agreed, Ralph?
No, it has to be. No means no. It never means yes. And then one of the things that really struck me about this case is the first case that the, I forget her name, was talking about.
Terry Goldberg.
The guy filmed it and produced it. Now, why wasn't he prosecuted for producing and distributing child pornography? You know, so there's a huge cultural thing that we need to deal with. And why weren't the educators, who were supposed to be, you know, the first responders, the mandatory reporters for sexual assault and sexual abuse, why did they step back and not fulfill their obligations? They should be prosecuted.
$1 million question. Carrie, how can we find more information about the work that you're doing?
Well, you can certainly go to my website or contact me. You know, the next chapter for these cases is we've asked the United States Department of Justice to come in and join the Office of Civil Rights in investigating at least the New York City Department of Ed, because I totally agree that this is just tip of the iceberg. We happen to get 3 cases, but each one of those girls represents scores of other girls who haven't been found, haven't come forward. And
Carrie, thank you for your time and the work you're doing.
All right, like I said, this is ridiculous. And again, if that had happened to my daughter or granddaughter or any family member, and they hadn't stepped up and snatched these kids up and threw their asses in jail and prosecuted them, they wouldn't have had to worry about that happening again, because they would have been taking a very nice long dirt nap, and anybody that had a problem with that, we could have worked that out between us.